Welcome to Human Monsters. The following statistics were compiled by RAIN, or Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Scope of the problem statistics. How often does sexual assault occur in the United States? Number of people victimized each year. Inmates, 80,600 were sexually assaulted or raped. Children, 60,000 were victims of substantiated or indicated sexual abuse. General public, 433,648 Americans 12 and older were sexually assaulted or raped. Military, 18,900 experienced unwanted sexual contact. Everyone is affected by sexual violence. Every 68 seconds, another American is sexually assaulted. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 14.8% completed, 2.8% attempted. About 3% of American men, or 1 in 33, have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. From 2009 to 2013, Child Protective Services agencies substantiated or found strong evidence to indicate that 63,000 children a year were victims of sexual abuse. A majority of child victims are 12 to 17. Of victims under the age of 18, 34% of victims of sexual assault and rape are under age 12, and 66% of victims of sexual assault and rape are age 12 to 17. 9 out of every 10 victims of rape are female. 90% female, 17.7 million American women as of 1998. 10% male, 2.78 million American men as of 1998. Breakdown of locations where sexual assault occurs. 55% at or near the victim's home. 15% in an open public place. 12% at or near a relative's home. 10% in an enclosed but public area, such as a parking lot or garage. 8% on school property. What was the survivor doing when the crime occurred? 48% were sleeping or performing another activity at home. 29% were traveling to and from work or school, or traveling to shop or run errands. 12% were working. 7% were attending school. 5% were doing an unknown or other activity. Understanding RAIN's statistics. Sexual violence is notoriously difficult to measure, and there is no single source of data that provides a complete picture of the crime. On RAIN's website, they have tried to select the most reliable source of statistics for each topic. The primary data source they use is the National Crime Victimization Survey, which is an annual study conducted by the Justice Department. To conduct NCVS, researchers interview tens of thousands of Americans each year to learn about crimes that they've experienced. Based on those interviews, the study provides estimates of the total number of crimes, including those that were not reported to police. Serial rapist number 1, Jeffrey Pelo. For 17 years, Jeffrey Pelo led a double life. By profession, he was a police officer who, as officers do, took an oath to serve and protect. He swore to usher society's vulnerable sector beyond the specter of harm. What the community of Bloomington Normal, a district of Illinois, didn't know, save for a select few female victims, was that he was a serial rapist and stalker. He abused his power and knowledge of crime scene management to terrorize his victims. This offender was methodical and meticulous, planning his crimes out down to the last detail, and, for many years, he was successful at avoiding detection. His approach to these crimes included stalking, home invasion, binding, and rape. He would clean up the scene so effectively afterwards that a seasoned investigator would have been hard-pressed to find incriminating evidence. After all, a sergeant would know exactly what they were looking for. When Pelo's crimes came to light, his colleagues were shocked. Up until that point, they knew him as an exemplary officer who believed in law and order and upheld those principles with unwavering integrity. He was a team player, punctual and reliable. He wasn't the kind of creep you expected to encounter in a dark alley. He was the type of man who cleared a dark alley with only his appearance. Nobody saw it coming. Assault number 1. Late one night in the township of Bloomington, Illinois, a young woman was asleep in her dwelling where she lived alone when she woke to the sound of shattering glass. She was seized by terror as a silhouetted figure appeared with the backdrop of a street lamp outdoors. The man was brandishing a weapon. He restrained her efficiently, as if having been trained in the art of doing so. It seemed as though he had had plenty of practice. He bound her ankles and wrists with duct tape. Something about the meticulous way he applied his methods suggested that he acted according to a plan he had devised long ago. He covered her head. She could see nothing in the darkness. There was little air to breathe. Oddly, his breathing was labored and raspy. She was beaten and raped. She felt violated and tortured. Once he was satisfied, he forced her to clean up the scene of that crime, so there would be no trace of his presence. Once he was gone, she was left alone, disoriented and traumatized. His actions reverberated in her memory. The victim reported the incident to the police, and they dispatched investigators to her home. It was all for naught. The offender was very effective at removing all traces of his DNA. It was too dark for her to give a description of him, so there was nothing to go on. Justice would prove to be elusive for the time being. Bloomington was a small community and a safe one before this attack. Now the town's women felt ill at ease as they went about their business, especially alone and at night. The police assured the public that they would patrol the streets in their vigilance and determination to find the perpetrator. But none of this worked. A few months passed without any similar incidents, and eventually the citizens of Bloomington were able to relax. Jeffrey Pelo watched the progress of the investigation closely and kept abreast of its failures. He kept note of the ways in which the investigators had erred, and it dictated the ways in which he offended while avoiding arrest. Trauma leaves your brain playing the damaging event over and over in a loop, like a video playback device that can only be stopped via disconnection. Pelo's victim struggled to contend with the memory of the attack, and she lived in fear of another. There was a second attack, but this time with a different victim. However similar the victims may have been, the methodology was the same. A bag was placed over her head. She was bound at the wrists and ankles with duct tape. The only real dissimilarity in this attack was geographical. This girl was a university student who lived in a markedly different district of Bloomington. Otherwise, the only new information was that the perpetrator was still actively offending. Choice of location is considered significant when investigating rapes and other violent crimes. One breakthrough in the long, exhaustive investigation was the discovery of a small thread in the second victim's home. It was so small it nearly went undetected. But as far as DNA profile work went, it would prove to be invaluable. The second victim's name was Sarah Miller. Her experience of the assault consisted of suddenly waking to find herself bound with duct tape and struggling to breathe within a plastic bag. The crime scene was thoroughly cleaned, leaving no DNA trail. A curious variation in this attack was that he stole a locket from her bedside table. Paranoia descended upon the community. People slept with the lights on. Locks were double and triple checked. Neighborhood watch groups sprang up. Nobody felt safe. Summer, 2 a.m. A yelping sound issued from the apartment of a young woman who was about to become the third victim of Jeffrey Pelo. Like the others, her cries were muffled by the plastic bag, and she was bound with duct tape. The yelping sound came from her dog. It was a small terrier, so as guard dogs went, it had little to offer other than its capacity to make noise. The dog was determined to do what it could to come to its owner's rescue, and it barked relentlessly and with anguish. It went on long enough to awaken her owner's neighbor, who could intuit that something was wrong at her neighbor's home. They called the police, who dispatched a cruiser with 2 officers to the woman's address. Officer Miller arrived in his patrol car. He approached the house when he saw someone in the dark in an alleyway. It was a man who suddenly made a run for it. Miller ran after him. After a brief pursuit, he caught up with the man and restrained him. It was Jeffrey Pelo. This was shocking to Miller. That a 17-year-old veteran of the force, with an impeccable service record, would commit offenses related to common prowling and worse? It was unthinkable. Miller put him in cuffs and placed him in his patrol car. Pelo was interrogated at the station. He denied any wrongdoing. He was perfectly calm, which was chilling as the interviewer peered into the man's unblinking blue eyes. It made sense. He was an experienced interrogator himself, and he knew how to achieve a cloak of inscrutability that no officer could penetrate. When Pelo chose a victim to stalk, he didn't select her at random. He would memorize every detail of their routines. He would map out their movements so that he would know exactly where to find them. He learned their schedules so that he could figure out the right time of day to strike so that he could minimize his chances of getting caught as they were at their most vulnerable. And, of course, his knowledge of what left traces of DNA behind endowed him with the know-how of the way to perfectly erase his every lingering impression. While in custody, Pelo claimed to have been a victim of unfortunate happenstance, but his story didn't hold up. His colleagues were experienced and highly trained in spotting a lie, and it didn't take long for them to realize he was the culprit they were looking for. A thorough and exhaustive search of Pelo's home and vehicle was carried out. New evidence emerged that established new links to the victims. Most damning of all was that there were recordings of his voice made from the crime scenes and recordings made of his voice as he interrogated suspects. The victims found them to be a perfect match. Also very helpful was that every victim described him as having a medium build and having piercing blue eyes. Though Pelo had a very able attorney who adeptly pointed out what came across as flaws in the evidence trove and the victims' testimonies, the prosecutor's arguments were just too strong. It didn't help that Pelo's statements were sometimes contradictory when subjected to scrutiny. The jury's deliberation period was brief, to say the least. In less than a day, he was found guilty of 35 counts of rape and stalking. He was sentenced to 440 years in prison. Serial rapist number 2, Ronald McDonald. No, I'm not being facetious. There is a real serial rapist on record named Ronald McDonald. He never worked as a mascot for a fast food chain, though he did volunteer to appear as Santa Claus year-round. Ronald Carroll McDonald was born on February 25, 1926. After his years serving in the U.S. Navy, he worked for the University of Michigan as a janitor until his retirement in 1982. In 1967, a coworker suggested to Ronald that he assume the role of Santa Claus for the benefit of sick children who were ailing in the medical facility in which he was employed. The previous Santa had retired. Ronald's wife, Beryl, played the role of Mrs. Claus. They visited the pediatric patients throughout the entire year. In 1982, Ronald began the practice of posing for photos in the Santa costume during the Christmas season at the Lake Forest Park Town Center. By doing so, he became a widely recognized figure throughout the community. Before his crimes came to light, people remembered him as being very friendly and helpful. Additionally, he volunteered to work as a child caretaker at his former workplace and at the nursery at Bethany Baptist Church in the township of Kenmore. He learned American Sign Language so he could communicate with deaf children, and became fluent in Vietnamese so he could speak to recent refugees. One day, a 6-year-old victim reported that McDonald had sexually abused him. When confronted, McDonald confessed to 7 other sex offenses. These crimes were committed over the span of 7 decades. While some close associates found his enthusiasm for children to be a bit overzealous, they assumed it was benign in intention. After his arrest, McDonald expressed remorse and accepted responsibility for his offenses. January 9th, 1998. McDonald pleaded guilty during his sentencing hearing. He confessed that he groomed the children in the role of babysitter at the Bethany Baptist Church and at the shopping mall and at UW Medical Center. He said the abuse actually took place once he brought them to his house. He asked for the maximum penalty for his crimes as a means of doing penance. He was emotional, apologetic, and expressed feelings towards his wife. He was sentenced to 26.5 years in confinement at the state's treatment center for sex offenders. He was never able to give an exact number, but he claimed to have begun molesting children in 1991, noting that he abused at least 45 kids and possibly as many as 70. August 7th, 2011. Ronald Carroll McDonald died. Serial rapist number 3, Paul Ogow. Paul Ogow was born on September 29, 1912, in Muntauen, East Prussia, Germany. He was the bastard child of a farm worker named Marie Saga. He was given the surname Saga at birth. At the age of 12, he was adopted by Johann Ogow, a farmer based in Havelland. Paul eventually took the man's surname as his own. Paul began his working life as a farm laborer in the village of Nauen. Eventually, he worked at a steel foundry in Brandenburg an der Havel. He would go on to settle in Berlin. When Paul was 18, he joined the Nazi Party. He became a member of its paramilitary branch, known as the Sturmabteilung. Once the party seized power in 1933, Paul was promoted. He was eventually elevated to the position of squad leader. He would end up becoming a railroad worker and was highly regarded by his colleagues for his efficiency. It was at work where he was most fondly remembered. August 1939. During this time, Paul and his wife and children resided in a district called Karlshorst. Paul began to lash out in violence against his first victims. He beat and raped dozens of women within and around the Friedrichsfelde area. Though the victims were chosen at random, the neighborhood was not. Most of the women lived alone, their husbands having been conscripted to serve in the military. The police documented 31 reported attacks. Paul was not just sexually violent with them, he would choke them, threaten to stab them, or bludgeon them. All the victims described him as wearing a railway worker's uniform. Paul Ogow was not satisfied with rape and the threat of violence. He desperately wanted to escalate the assaults. The first 3 attempts at murder were unsuccessful, with him stabbing 3 women, but they all recovered. They reported him to the police. In August 1940, he aggressively bludgeoned a woman after raping her aboard the train on which he worked. She became unconscious, which led Paul to believe she had died, but she survived. In September, one of his victims survived a strangulation by him. She also survived being thrown from a moving train. He continued to take such risks in public, resulting in him getting caught. In one train station, he tried to rape a woman only for her husband and brother-in-law to come to her rescue when she screamed. He was severely beaten by both men, but escaped before the law caught up with him. Paul Ogow did not quit. He only devised a new plan on how to commit his crimes without getting caught. An asset to Paul as a murderer of women at this time was that blackouts had become commonplace in Berlin, so it was not unusual to encounter railroad staff members in the dark, and the female passengers did not suspect anything nefarious was afoot. Ogow took full advantage of this, and when he took a ticket from a passenger he found particularly appealing and vulnerable, he would swoop down like the apex predator he was. He committed a murder on October 4th, 1940. He paid a visit to the home of Gertrude Gerda Ditter under the pretense that it was going to be a casual encounter to be enjoyed by both, while her husband was away in the war. Whether or not he penetrated her vaginally, he did stab her to death. December 4th, Paul Ogow killed 2 more women. Elfriede Franke got her skull crushed by an iron bar before her corpse was thrown from the moving train. 19-year-old Irmgard Friese was accosted by Ogow while she was walking home. He raped and bludgeoned her to death. December 22nd, railway workers discovered a 4th victim, Elisabeth Bunkener. She died from blunt force trauma. December 28th, 1940. Officers of the Berlin police discovered the remains of Gertrude Sewert the morning after she was assaulted and thrown from a train by Paul Ogow. She was in rough shape due to exposure and various physical traumas. She was taken to hospital but died the next day. February 11th, Ogow's 7th victim, Johanna Voigt, a mother of 3, was found dead. An autopsy revealed she was killed by repeated blows to the head. She was also injured by being thrown from a train. Investigators concluded that the last rash of femicide must have been committed by a single offender. Paul Ogow had the media on his side. The propaganda wing of the Nazi Party was afraid to publicize crime for fear it would tarnish morale, so much of the coverage of his crimes was censored. However, the police couldn't just do nothing, so they interviewed thousands of railway workers and thousands of detectives investigated the case discreetly. Aware that the police were sizing up their approach to the case, Paul took a hiatus from rape and murder. July 3rd, 1941. Such was the day when he slayed his final victim, her being 35-year-old Frida Kozio. When questioned about who among the railroad workforce was considered most likely to commit violent acts against women, employees said that Paul Ogow was often given to making misogynistic remarks and even expressed a fascination with murder. Though forensics were in their infancy, an investigator took a careful look at some of Paul Ogow's uniforms and found that many were stained with blood. Paul Ogow was arrested on July 12th. During an intensive interrogation session, Paul was confronted with many articles of evidence, including one of his most severely injured victims, a tray of skulls accumulated from the murders. His motives included an excessive sex drive, sexual attraction to his victims' resistance, and a pathological hatred of women. Though he gave a confession without resistance, he blamed his actions on alcoholism. He also noted that a Jewish doctor treated him poorly for gonorrhea. Paul Ogow was formally expelled from the Nazi Party a few days before his indictment. He pled guilty to 8 murders, 6 attempted murders, and 31 cases of rape. He was sentenced to death on July 24th by the Regional Supreme Court. He was declared an enemy of the people by authorities in the Nazi Party. July 26, 1941. Paul Ogow was executed via guillotine. Serial rapist number 4, Alton Coleman. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. He was raised by his 73-year-old grandmother as his mother worked 3 jobs. Alton became well known to local law enforcement circles as a sex offender. Between 1973 and 1983, he was charged with 6 sex offenses. 2 of the cases were dismissed since the charges were reduced in severity because of a plea bargain in 2 of the cases. He was acquitted in 2 others. He was charged with the rape of a 14-year-old girl but fled the county before the case went to trial. At some point, Alton Coleman was diagnosed by mental health professionals. He was found to have mixed personality disorder with probable antisocial, narcissistic, and obsessive features. In addition, he was noted for having epileptic spasms, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder. Another figure who played a significant role in this drama is Deborah Brown, Alton's accomplice. She was born on November 11, 1962. She is one of 11 children. Deborah was intellectually disabled, which was exacerbated by head trauma as a child. A psychiatrist diagnosed her as having dependent personality disorder, exactly what a guy like Alton Coleman would have been seeking in a mate. Deborah was engaged when she met Alton in 1983. She broke up with the man to whom she was engaged and left her family's home so she could shack up with Alton. Deborah is noted for having no inclinations or history of violence prior to her relations with Coleman. Alton and Deborah committed their first murder in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The victim was 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. It took place after Alton befriended Vernita's mother, Juanita. The murder happened on May 29, 1984. On June 19th, Vernita's body was found in an abandoned building 4 blocks from the home of Alton's grandmother. Vernita's corpse was badly decomposed. The autopsy disclosed that Vernita was raped and died by strangulation. Here is more evidence that Alton Coleman made a lousy friend. After winning the trust of Robert Carpenter in Waukegan and spending the night in his home, he asked to borrow his car to go to the store and never returned. June 1984, Alton and Deborah came upon 2 young girls in Gary, Indiana, them being 9-year-old Annie Turks and her 7-year-old niece, Tamika Turks. Alton and Deborah raped both girls. Annie survived the assault, but Tamika did not. Tamika's decomposed body was found on June 19th. That same day, 25-year-old Donna Williams, also from Gary, went missing. Her decomposing body was found on July 11th in Detroit. She was raped and killed by strangulation. June 28th, Alton and Deborah broke into the home of Palmer Jones and his wife Marjorie in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. They beat the couple severely. Alton ripped the telephone from the wall. They stole money and their car as they left. July 5th, Alton and Deborah migrated to Toledo, Ohio. There, Alton befriended Virginia Temple, a mother of several children. Relatives became concerned when Virginia stopped responding to their calls. When police entered her home as part of a wellness check, they found her children alone and in a state of panic. Virginia and her eldest child, 9-year-old Rochelle, had been strangled to death and left in a crawl space. July 12th, 15-year-old Tawny Story lived in Cincinnati. She disappeared and was found dead 8 days later. A bracelet that had been stolen from Virginia Temple's home was found under her body. At this time, America's Most Wanted added Alton Coleman to its list as a rare 11th offender. Subsequent to the murder of Tawny Story, Alton and Deborah rode into the municipality of Norwood on bicycles. Just shy of 3 hours later, they drove out of town in a car they stole from Harry and Marlene Walters. Harry was beaten to the point of unconsciousness. Marlene was murdered by blunt force trauma. The state of Ohio convicted Coleman and Brown for the rape and murder of Tawny Story and Marlene Walters. They were sentenced to death. Before he was put to death, Coleman issued a statement in which he apologized for what he had done. Fun fact: the following items were chosen as Alton Coleman's final meal: A well-done filet mignon smothered with mushrooms, fried chicken breasts, a salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie topped with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and cherry Coke. I always kind of like my idea of eating a bunch of popcorn kernels so that as they're frying me on the electric chair, my stomach starts to pop with popcorn. But that's just me. I'm going to leave you with a powerful account given by a girl who identifies only as J. Mura for obviously anonymity. It's a powerful account of how she was sexually abused by her father. I think it's worth listening to. It's a very powerful story. So here it is, and thank you very much for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.
Hey guys, it's probably going to be somewhat of a long video, but I wanted to say this for basically hoping to get some feedback and also to tell my story. I'm going to be reading what I wrote, and just to give you a little bit, I guess, more of my story of what I've been through. So, here we go. This is flashbacks of being molested. Now, I'll probably get all emotional with this one because it's a very sensitive subject to talk about. Personally, it hurts to talk about it because I'm reliving this with all of the fear as a child, as if I'm a child again. Let's start from the beginning. My dad began molesting me when I was about the age of 7 to about the age of 14. Which was when I started my period. I guess he didn't want to graduate from what he was already doing to me, from basically already doing to actual sex, and get me pregnant. And that's pretty sick. As you can already see, he basically did everything but sex. He first started with using his fingers to play with me down there whenever he could get my mom and dad brother out of the house for a few hours. Then he went on with getting behind me under the covers in bed and move his private parts back and forth in between my legs. There were some other things that he did to me. He had me give him oral, get him off until he came, and he did oral on me and then look at me and ask if it felt good. He had me play with myself while he had a camcorder linked to a TV so he could see it and watch it while I was playing with myself. I went outside after that. Then he came outside and apologized for what he did to me, what he made me do. He also burned the tape right in front of me. He would tell me that my mom didn't please him enough, that she wasn't the wife that she should be. So I needed to take her place. I didn't realize any of this was wrong until I got older. I thought I was Daddy's little girl. The last thing he did to me was have me drop my panties, bend over the bed, while he attempted to sodomize me. I screamed because it obviously hurt. I think he stopped molesting me after that because he was afraid it would escalate to sex. Who knows? Later on, when I was an adult, I confronted him about why he did all the things he done to me. He first asked for forgiveness, then proceeded to say that the devil made him do it. Let me see if I can read. I don't know what was going... Let's see. I don't know what was going through his mind to say that. But if that's true, then why did he stop? Did the devil just magically leave? Things don't work out that way. Once a child molester, always a child molester. It would be by God's grace, and if he was sincere and about asking God for forgiveness. And I'm not the only one he has molested. He touched another girl that my parents babysat before I was born. And he got 6 months in jail. Evidently, he didn't learn the first time. My fears. I fear that he will never ask for forgiveness. I feel he'll never truly understand the full extent of the damage he caused me and throughout my entire life. I fear that he'll go to hell because he never asked for God's forgiveness. I fear that he'll never face the things he did to me. I fear that he'll never get help from God and a Christian counselor. I fear that I'll always have flashbacks of the molestation, especially during sex with my husband. I fear that my husband will never look at me differently during sex because he has read my story. I fear that other people will look at me different after this video. I fear that I'll always have a cloud of shame hanging over me. And I fear that I'll always have PTSD from this trauma. My resolve. I'm going to counseling for my trauma. I'm getting treatment for my PTSD, my depression, and for my insomnia. I'm finding better ways to coping, such as writing about my anxiety instead of just sticking to my addictions. I'm being more open with my husband about my flashbacks so he can understand and know that it wasn't his fault. That he did nothing wrong because I can have flashbacks randomly without no cause. I pray that my dad will ask God to forgive him. I pray that he will get help. I pray that he will eventually face the things he did to me. I pray that he'll understand the damage he has done, because he has caused a lot of damage, believe me. It's good to hear from my husband himself that he will never look at me differently. I pray that you don't look at me differently either. And guys, if this is too sensitive, don't watch and listen in front of kids, because they obviously don't need to hear it. It's sensitive. But guys, I want your feedback, your comments. What do you think? Because I'm thinking about posting this on YouTube later, if I can get the courage to, honestly. Because I know I'll have some trolls that want to be evil and comment bad things. But I also know that I have people going through the same thing, that they'll get help for this, that they'll forgive their perpetrators, and that they can go on with their lives. So I'm going to wrap up this video, and I thank you for watching. And like I said, just let me know what you think. Bye.